Clara had always been a woman of routine. Every Sunday morning without fail, she would wake up early, make herself a cup of tea, and sit by the window for a few quiet moments before heading out. The world outside was often loud, cars honking, people rushing, but inside her small home everything felt calm. It was the one day of the week when Clara allowed herself to slow down, to breathe deeply, and to focus on what truly mattered. Remembering Daniel. Daniel had been her husband, her partner, her best friend. They had shared 10 wonderful years together before fate cruelly intervened. 2 years ago, a drunk driver ran a red light, colliding with Daniel's car as he drove home from work. He didn't survive the crash. That night, Clara's life changed forever. She became a widow at 36, left to navigate a world that suddenly seemed cold and empty without him. To cope with her grief, Clara found comfort in visiting Daniel's grave. It wasn't just about paying respects. It was about keeping his memory alive. Each week she brought fresh flowers, roses or lilies depending on what looked best at the market, and carefully cleaned the headstone. Over time, this ritual became more than a way to honor Daniel. It became a lifeline. Talking to him, even though he couldn't respond, helped Clara feel connected to him again. She told him about her week, asked for advice, and sometimes simply sat there in silence, letting the weight of her emotions settle around her. This particular Sunday started like any other. Clara woke up early, made her tea, and prepared the bouquet of white roses she'd picked out the day before. As she stepped into her car, the autumn air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves. The drive to the cemetery was familiar, almost meditative. Trees lined the road, their branches heavy with golden and crimson foliage. Clara liked this time of year. It reminded her of the walk she and Daniel used to take together through the park, holding hands and laughing over silly jokes. When she arrived at the cemetery, the grounds were quiet, as they usually were. Most people avoided visiting graves on Sundays, preferring busier days like holidays or anniversaries. But Clara preferred the solitude. She parked her car near the entrance and walked slowly toward Daniel's plot, clutching the flowers tightly in one hand. Her footsteps crunched softly against the gravel path, the sound blending with the distant chirping of birds. As she approached the grave, Clara noticed something unusual. A thin layer of dirt and leaves had gathered on the headstone, despite her efforts to keep it clean the previous week. She sighed, setting the flowers down gently before pulling a damp cloth from her bag. Kneeling beside the grave, she began wiping away the grime, humming a soft tune under her breath. The repetitive motion was soothing, helping her push aside the sadness that often lingered in these moments. But then, as she worked, she heard it, a faint, high-pitched cry. At first, Clara thought it might be her imagination. Cemeteries were supposed to be silent places after all. Yet the sound persisted, growing louder and clearer. It was unmistakably the cry of a child, filled with distress and longing. Clara froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Who could possibly be here? And why would a child be crying in such a somber place? She glanced around, searching for the source of the noise. The cemetery stretched out endlessly in every direction, rows upon rows of tombstones standing like silent sentinels. There was no sign of anyone nearby, no parents, no caretakers, not even another visitor. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves in the breeze and that haunting cry, which seemed to come from somewhere close yet impossible to pinpoint. Clara hesitated, torn between curiosity and fear. Part of her wanted to ignore the sound and continue cleaning Daniel's grave, pretending she hadn't heard anything. After all, cemeteries weren't exactly known for being welcoming places, especially for those who wandered alone. But another part of her, the stronger, more compassionate part, couldn't shake the feeling that someone needed help. What if a child really was lost or hurt? She couldn't just leave without finding out. Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, Clara stood up and followed the sound. Her legs felt unsteady beneath her, each step hesitant and uncertain. The cries grew louder as she moved farther away from Daniel's grave, leading her deeper into the cemetery. Tombstones loomed on either side of her, their inscriptions worn smooth by time and weather. Some were grand and ornate, while others were simple and plain, but all carried the same message. Life was fleeting, and death was inevitable. Despite the beauty of the surroundings, Clara couldn't shake the eerie atmosphere that surrounded her. Shadows danced across the ground as the sun peeked through the trees, casting long, distorted shapes that seemed to follow her every move. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ward off the chill that crept up her spine. Still, she pressed on, determined to find the source of the crying. The sound eventually led her to an area of the cemetery she rarely visited, an old section filled with crumbling mausoleums and forgotten graves. The iron gates of one particular mausoleum stood slightly ajar, creaking softly in the wind. Clara paused, staring at the dark opening before her. The cries were definitely coming from inside, but stepping into that gloomy space felt like crossing some invisible boundary. For a moment she considered turning back, convincing herself it was nothing more than her imagination playing tricks on her. Yet something stopped her. Maybe it was the desperation in the child's voice, or maybe it was the nagging thought that she couldn't live with herself if she ignored someone in need. Whatever the reason, Clara steeled herself and pushed the gate open wider, peering cautiously into the darkness beyond. And that's when she saw him, a small figure huddled in the corner, trembling and sobbing uncontrollably. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the tiny figure huddled in the corner of the mausoleum. The child was no older than 5 or 6, his small frame shaking with sobs that echoed eerily against the stone walls. His clothes were dirty and torn, smeared with mud and leaves as if he'd been wandering through the woods for hours, or perhaps days. Shadows danced across his pale face, making him look even more fragile and vulnerable. For a moment, Clara couldn't move. Her mind raced with questions. Who was this boy? How had he ended up in such a desolate place? And why hadn't anyone noticed him before now? But above all, her heart ached for the child. She knew she couldn't just stand there staring. She had to do something. Taking a cautious step forward, Clara knelt down a few feet away from him, keeping her movements slow and deliberate so as not to startle him. "Hey," she said softly, her voice gentle but firm. "Are you okay? What's your name?" The boy didn't respond immediately. He continued crying, his small shoulders heaving with each sob. Clara reached out instinctively, placing a hand on his arm to offer comfort. To her surprise, he flinched at her touch, pulling back slightly before finally looking up at her. His eyes were red and swollen, his expression one of confusion mixed with fear. I don't know," he whispered after a long pause, his voice trembling. "I'm scared." Clara felt her chest tighten. Whatever had happened to this child, it must have been terrible. She forced herself to smile reassuringly, though her own nerves were frayed. "It's okay," she said, softening her tone even further. "You're safe now. Can you tell me your name? Do you know where you are?" The boy hesitated, glancing around the dim interior of the mausoleum as if noticing his surroundings for the first time. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he mumbled, "Liam?" "Liam," Clara repeated, letting the name roll off her tongue. It suited him somehow, simple yet full of meaning. "That's a nice name. My name is Clara. Do you remember how you got here, Liam?" He shook his head slowly, his lower lip quivering. "I don't know. I was looking for my mommy, but I can't find her." His voice cracked on the last word and fresh tears spilled down his cheeks. Clara's heart broke a little more. Every fiber of her being wanted to scoop him into her arms and promise him everything would be all right, but she resisted the urge, knowing that might overwhelm him further. Instead, she stayed where she was, offering him space while maintaining eye contact to show she wasn't going anywhere. "Do you know where your mommy is?" she asked carefully, choosing her words with precision. She didn't want to upset him any more than he already was. Liam frowned, his brow furrowing as he tried to think. "She told me to wait," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "But then I fell asleep, and when I woke up, she was gone. I've been looking for her ever since." Clara nodded, trying to piece together what little information he'd given her. Was his mother nearby? Had she accidentally left him behind, or was there something darker at play? Something Clara didn't want to consider. "Okay, Liam," she said gently, forcing another reassuring smile. "We'll figure this out together, all right? Let's get you out of here first. This place isn't very warm and you must be hungry." At the mention of food, Liam's eyes lit up slightly, though sadness still lingered in their depths. He nodded hesitantly, allowing Clara to help him to his feet. As they stepped out of the mausoleum and into the daylight, Clara couldn't help but notice how frail he looked. His hands were icy cold and his skin was pale, almost translucent. She wrapped an arm around his shoulders protectively, guiding him toward her car. On the way, she kept talking to him in a soothing voice, asking simple questions about his favorite things, like whether he liked pizza or ice cream, to distract him from whatever trauma he'd experienced. Liam responded in short, broken sentences, but it was enough to keep him engaged. By the time they reached her car, some of the tension seemed to ease from his tiny body. Once inside, Clara turned on the heater and handed him a water bottle she kept in the glove compartment. "Here, drink this," she instructed kindly. "It'll make you feel better." Liam obeyed, taking tentative sips as Clara fastened his seatbelt. She glanced at him in the rearview mirror, her mind racing with possibilities. Where could his mother be? Should she call the police? Or should she try to find the woman herself? For now, though, her priority was getting Liam somewhere safe and warm. As she drove toward her house, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something about this situation was off. There was no logical explanation for why a young child would be alone in a cemetery, especially one as remote as this. And then there was the way Liam spoke. His answers vague and disjointed, as if he weren't entirely sure of his own memories. It was unsettling, but Clara pushed those thoughts aside for the moment. Right now, Liam needed her help. And that was all that mattered. When they arrived at her modest home, Clara ushered Liam inside and led him to the kitchen. She made him a peanut butter sandwich and poured him a glass of milk, watching as he ate hungrily. Despite his obvious exhaustion, there was a spark of life in his eyes, a glimmer of hope that made Clara determined to reunite him with his mother, no matter what it took. After lunch, she helped Liam wash his face and hands, marveling at how quickly he seemed to trust her. Most children would be wary of strangers, especially after being lost and frightened. Yet Liam clung to her like a lifeline, as if he instinctively knew she meant him no harm. As evening approached, Clara tucked Liam into her spare bedroom, promising to stay close by in case he needed anything. She sat on the edge of the bed, brushing his hair back from his forehead as he drifted off to sleep. For the first time since finding him, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, letting the weight of the day settle over her. But even as Liam slept peacefully, Clara's mind wouldn't rest. Something about this whole situation felt wrong, not dangerous necessarily, but strange. And deep down, she knew she wouldn't truly relax until she uncovered the truth. Clara woke up early the next morning, her mind still heavy with unanswered questions. The events of the previous day replayed in her head like a movie on repeat. The eerie silence of the cemetery, the haunting cries that led her to Liam, and the strange way he seemed both present and distant at the same time. She tiptoed out of her room, careful not to wake Liam, who was still asleep in the spare bedroom. As she made her way to the kitchen, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The house felt different somehow, quieter than usual, yet charged with an odd energy. Clara tried to brush it off as nerves, but the sensation lingered. She brewed herself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, staring out at the gray morning sky. Her thoughts drifted back to Liam. Who was he? Where had he come from? And why did his story feel so incomplete? As the sun began to rise, casting a soft golden glow over the neighborhood, Clara decided she needed answers. She couldn't just sit around waiting for Liam's mother to magically appear. If there was any chance of finding her, or at least understanding what had happened, she would have to take action. Her first step was simple: search online. She grabbed her laptop and opened a search engine, typing in missing child along with the name Liam had given her. At first, nothing useful came up, just news articles about unrelated cases scattered across different states. Frustrated, Clara leaned back in her chair, tapping her fingers against the table. Then an idea struck her. What if Liam had been missing for longer than she assumed? Maybe this wasn't a recent incident. She adjusted her search parameters, adding phrases like cold case and unsolved disappearance. This time, the results were more promising. One article caught her attention immediately, a headline that sent chills down her spine. Local boy missing for over a decade, case remains unsolved. Clara clicked on the link, her heart pounding as she scanned the page. The article detailed the disappearance of a young boy named Liam Harper, who had vanished without a trace 10 years ago. According to the report, Liam had been playing near a wooded area close to the cemetery when he suddenly disappeared. Despite extensive searches by local authorities and volunteers, no sign of him was ever found, not even a shoe or a piece of clothing. Eventually, the case went cold, leaving Liam's family devastated and without closure. Clara's hands trembled as she scrolled through the photos accompanying the article. There was one of Liam as a toddler, smiling brightly with curly brown hair and dimples that matched the boy sleeping in her guest room. Another photo showed his parents, his mother, Sarah, clutching a stuffed animal while tears streamed down her face, and his father, Mark, standing stoically beside her, his expression hollow with grief. A wave of unease washed over Clara. How could this be possible? The Liam in her home looked exactly like the boy in the pictures, except older. But that didn't make sense. He should have been a teenager by now, not a child. Unless... Before she could finish the thought, a loud crash echoed from the living room. Startled, Clara jumped to her feet and rushed out of the kitchen. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for the source of the noise. That's when she saw it. A framed photograph lying shattered on the floor. It was a picture of her and Daniel taken during happier times before his accident. The glass was cracked, and the frame itself had split apart. But what really unnerved her was the position of the photo. It hadn't fallen from its usual spot on the wall. Instead, it lay face down on the carpet, as if someone, or something, had deliberately knocked it over. Clara knelt down, her pulse racing. She picked up the broken frame, examining it closely. There was no logical explanation for how it ended up on the floor. No gust of wind could have caused this. All the windows were closed, and Liam was still asleep in the other room, wasn't he? Just as she was about to stand up, she noticed something strange. On the back of the photograph, written in faint pencil marks, were 2 words. Help me. Her breath hitched. Those words hadn't been there before. She was certain of it. Someone had written them recently, pressing hard enough to leave an indentation on the wooden backing. The handwriting was shaky, almost childlike. Clara's stomach twisted into knots. Was this some kind of prank? Had someone broken into her house while she slept? Or was it something else entirely? Before she could process what she'd seen, she heard soft footsteps behind her. Turning quickly, she saw Liam standing in the doorway, rubbing his eyes sleepily. He looked innocent enough, dressed in the oversized pajamas she'd lent him the night before. Yet there was something unsettling about the way he stared at her, his expression blank and unreadable. "Did you hear that noise?" Clara asked, forcing a smile to mask her growing anxiety. Liam shook his head slowly, his gaze shifting to the broken frame in her hands. For a brief moment, his lips curled into a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You found me," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Clara frowned, confused. "What do you mean you found me?" Liam didn't respond. Instead, he walked past her and knelt beside the shattered remains of the photograph. His small fingers traced the jagged edges of the broken glass, pausing briefly over the words scrawled on the back. Then, without warning, he looked up at her, his eyes wide and unblinking. "I've been waiting for you," he said simply, his tone eerily calm. Clara's blood ran cold. Every instinct told her to grab her keys, bundle Liam into the car and drive straight to the police station, but something held her back. Maybe it was the innocence in his voice, or maybe it was the flicker of sadness in his eyes that reminded her too much of Daniel. Whatever the reason, she stayed rooted to the spot, unable to look away. "Waiting for me?" she echoed, her voice trembling. "Why?" Liam tilted his head slightly as if considering her question. "Because I can't leave," he replied after a pause. "Not until you help me." Clara swallowed hard, her mind racing. Help him with what? What did he need? From her? Before she could ask, Liam stood up and wandered back toward the guest room, leaving her alone with the broken photograph and 1,000 unanswered questions swirling in her head. Over the next hour, Clara tried to distract herself by tidying up the house. But her thoughts kept circling back to Liam and the cryptic things he'd said. She couldn't ignore the growing suspicion that this wasn't just a case of a lost child. It was something far more complicated. Something supernatural. By late morning, Clara realized she couldn't handle this on her own. She needed guidance, someone who might understand what was happening. After some deliberation, she decided to call her sister Emily. They weren't particularly close, in fact, they rarely spoke. But Emily had always been fascinated by mysteries and the paranormal. If anyone could offer insight, it was her. When Emily answered the phone, Clara hesitated, unsure how to explain the situation without sounding crazy. Finally, she blurted out, "I think I have a ghost in my house." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, to Clara's surprise, Emily laughed. "Are you serious right now?" "I'm dead serious," Clara shot back, her frustration mounting. "This kid, I found him in the cemetery yesterday. He says his name is Liam and everything about him matches this old missing persons case I found online. Except, he shouldn't exist. He disappeared 10 years ago." Emily's laughter faded, replaced by genuine curiosity. "Wait, hold on, you're saying this kid is, what, a spirit?" "I don't know," Clara exclaimed, pacing the length of the kitchen. "All I know is that weird stuff keeps happening, and he says things that make absolutely no sense. Like he told me he's been waiting for me and he can't leave until I help him. What does that even mean?" Emily was silent for a moment, clearly processing the information. "Okay, listen," she said finally. "If this is real, and I'm not saying it is, you need to figure out what he wants. Ghosts usually stick around because they have unfinished business. Maybe he needs you to find his mom or something." Clara sighed, running a hand through her hair. "That's just it. His mom is probably dead too. The article said his dad passed away years ago and his mom moved away after giving up hope of finding him. I don't even know where to start." "Well, start with the cemetery," Emily suggested. "If he was last seen there, maybe there's a clue nearby. Just be careful, okay? Don't do anything reckless." Clara nodded, even though Emily couldn't see her. "Thanks. I'll let you know what happens." After hanging up, Clara spent the rest of the day preparing for another visit to the cemetery. She packed a flashlight, a notebook, and a camera, determined to document anything unusual she might encounter. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, she glanced at Liam, who was sitting quietly on the couch, watching her movements with an intensity that made her uneasy. "You coming with me?" she asked cautiously. Liam nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'll show you where to go." And with that, they set off into the night, heading back to the place where it had all begun. Clara didn't know what awaited them there, but one thing was certain. Whatever secrets Liam was hiding, they were buried deep within the shadows of the cemetery, and uncovering them would change her life forever. The drive back to the cemetery felt longer than it had the day before. Clara gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white under the dim glow of the dashboard lights. Beside her in the passenger seat, Liam sat silently, staring out the window at the darkening landscape. His small hands were folded neatly in his lap, and his face was expressionless, almost serene. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something about him was off. The way he moved, or rather didn't move, seemed unnatural, as if he weren't entirely present. As they approached the gates of the cemetery, Clara parked the car and turned off the engine. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the soft hum of crickets in the distance and the occasional rustle of leaves stirred by the night breeze. Clara hesitated, glancing at Liam. "Are you sure about this?" she asked gently. "Do you know what we're looking for?" Liam nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the rows of tombstones stretching out into the darkness. "I'll show you," he said simply, opening the car door and stepping outside. Clara followed him, grabbing the flashlight from the back seat. She flicked it on, its beam cutting through the gloom like a knife. Shadows danced across the weathered stones as they walked deeper into the cemetery, their footsteps crunching softly against the gravel path. Despite the chill in the air, Clara's palms were sweaty, her heart pounding faster with each step. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something following them. "Where are we going?" she asked after several minutes of silence. Liam didn't answer right away. Instead, he stopped suddenly, pointing toward an area of the cemetery that Clara hadn't explored before. It was older, more neglected than the rest, with overgrown weeds and ivy creeping up cracked headstones. In the center stood a crumbling mausoleum, its iron gate hanging crookedly on rusted hinges. Something about the structure sent a shiver down Clara's spine. It looked as though it hadn't been touched in decades. "This is it," Liam whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. Clara frowned, shining her flashlight on the mausoleum. "What is? What's here?" Instead of answering, Liam began walking again, heading straight for the building. Clara hurried after him, her pulse quickening. As they reached the entrance, she noticed the vines covering the walls seemed unnaturally thick, twisting together like protective barriers meant to keep intruders out. Pushing aside her unease, she stepped inside, the beam of her flashlight illuminating the dusty interior. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about the space. Empty shelves lined the walls where coffins might once have rested, now covered in cobwebs and grime. A faint, musty smell hung in the air, making Clara wrinkle her nose. But then, as she swept the light across the floor, she saw it. A patch of earth near the back wall that looked disturbed. The dirt was loose, freshly turned, as though someone had been digging recently. "What's this?" Clara murmured, kneeling beside the spot. She reached out hesitantly, brushing away some of the soil with her fingers. Beneath the surface, she uncovered a small stone marker partially buried in the ground. It was worn and weathered, but she could just make out an inscription carved into its surface. "Here lies Liam Harper, beloved son." Clara froze, her breath catching in her throat. Her mind raced as she pieced together the horrifying truth. This grave belonged to Liam, the same Liam who had gone missing 10 years ago, the same Liam who was standing beside her now. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "This can't be real." But Liam didn't seem surprised. He stared down at the grave with a mixture of sadness and acceptance, as if he'd always known it was there. "I told you I couldn't leave," he said quietly, his voice tinged with sorrow. "Not until you helped me." Clara scrambled to her feet, backing away from the grave as if it might swallow her whole. "Help you with what?" she demanded, her voice trembling. You're dead, aren't you?" Liam nodded, his expression calm despite the gravity of the revelation. "I've been waiting for someone to find me," he explained. "To tell my mom that I'm okay, that I'm not scared anymore." The words hit Clara like a punch to the gut. All this time she'd thought she was helping a lost child reunite with his mother, but now she realized the truth. Liam wasn't alive. He never had been, not since the day he disappeared. The boy she'd brought home, fed and cared for, was a ghost tethered to the cemetery, unable to move on because he needed closure. Tears welled up in Clara's eyes as the weight of the situation settled over her. She wanted to scream, to run away and pretend none of this had ever happened. But deep down she knew she couldn't abandon Liam, not when he needed her most. Swallowing hard, she forced herself to focus. "Okay," she said, her voice shaky, but determined. "If I help you, will you finally be able to rest?" Liam smiled faintly, a look of gratitude crossing his face. Yes, he replied. But first, you need to find my mom. Clara sighed, rubbing her temples as she tried to think. According to the article she'd read earlier, Liam's mother, Sarah, had moved away years ago after giving up hope of finding her son. Tracking her down wouldn't be easy, especially without any leads. But Clara refused to give up. If there was even a sliver of a chance to bring peace to Liam, and maybe to herself, she would do whatever it took. Over the next few days, Clara threw herself into research, scouring old news articles, social media profiles, and public records for any trace of Sarah Harper. It was exhausting work, but every time she felt like giving up, she remembered the look in Liam's eyes, the mix of longing and despair that haunted her dreams. Slowly but surely, she pieced together fragments of information. Sarah had remarried and changed her last name to Bennett. She lived in a small town 3 hours away, working as a nurse at a local hospital. With this new lead, Clara packed a bag and prepared for the trip. Before leaving, she sat down with Liam to explain her plan. "I'm going to find your mom," she promised, "and I'll tell her everything. You'll finally get the chance to say goodbye." Liam nodded, his smile brighter this time. "Thank you," he said softly, "for everything." The drive to Sarah's town was long and nerve-wracking. Clara rehearsed what she would say over and over in her head, trying to prepare herself for the emotional conversation ahead. When she finally arrived at the address listed in the records, she found herself standing in front of a modest house surrounded by flower beds and a white picket fence. Taking a deep breath, she knocked on the door. A woman answered, a petite brunette with kind eyes and a warm smile. Clara recognized her instantly from the photographs she'd seen online. This was Sarah Harper, Liam's mother. "Hi," Clara began, her voice trembling slightly. "My name is Clara. I think I have something important to tell you about your son." Sarah's smile faltered, replaced by a look of confusion and concern. "My son?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "But Liam, I know," Clara interrupted gently. "He disappeared 10 years ago. But he's been waiting for you, Sarah. He wants you to know that he's okay." For a moment, Sarah just stared at her, tears welling up in her eyes. Then, without saying a word, she invited Clara inside. Over the next hour, Clara shared everything: how she'd found Liam in the cemetery, the strange occurrences in her home, and the discovery of his grave. By the end of the story, both women were crying, holding on to each other as if clinging to life itself. When Clara returned home later that evening, Liam was waiting for her in the living room. He looked different somehow, lighter, freer. "She knows now," Clara told him, smiling through her tears. "Your mom knows you're okay." Liam's smile widened, and for the first time, Clara saw true happiness in his eyes. "Thank you," he said one last time, his voice filled with gratitude. And then, just like that, he was gone. Clara sat alone in the quiet house, overwhelmed by a mix of sadness and relief. Though Liam was no longer with her, she felt a profound sense of peace. She had done what she set out to do, not just for him, but for herself. In helping Liam find closure, she had begun to heal too. The days following Liam's departure were strange for Clara. The house felt different, lighter somehow, as if an invisible weight had been lifted. Gone were the eerie noises and unexplained movements that had once filled her home with unease. Even the air seemed clearer, fresher, as though the lingering shadows of the past had finally dissipated. Yet despite the newfound calm, Clara couldn't shake the bittersweet ache in her heart. She missed Liam, not just his presence, but the sense of purpose he had brought into her life. Helping him had awakened something within her, a part of herself she hadn't realized was buried under layers of grief and loneliness. For weeks after their final conversation, Clara found herself thinking about Liam often. She replayed their encounters in her mind. The way he had looked at her with those wide, trusting eyes. The cryptic things he had said that only made sense now. The gratitude in his voice when she promised to help him find closure. It wasn't sadness that consumed her, though. Instead, it was a profound sense of connection, a realization that even in death people could leave lasting impressions on one another. But as the initial shock of everything wore off, Clara began to reflect more deeply on what had happened. She couldn't ignore the fact that her encounter with Liam had opened doors she hadn't known existed, doors to mysteries beyond comprehension, to worlds unseen yet undeniably real. And while she didn't consider herself someone who believed in ghosts or spirits before, she couldn't deny what she had experienced firsthand. The question gnawing at her now was simple. Why her? Out of all the people in the world, why had Liam chosen her to help him? One evening, as she sat by the window, nursing a cup of tea, Clara decided to revisit the cemetery, not because she expected to see Liam again. He was gone, she reminded herself, but because she needed to process everything in the place where it had all begun. There was something poetic about returning to the source of such a life-altering event, as if standing there might give her clarity. The cemetery was quieter than usual, bathed in the golden light of a setting sun. Autumn leaves crunched beneath her feet as she walked along familiar paths, passing rows of weathered tombstones until she reached the old mausoleum. The vines still clung stubbornly to its walls, and the iron gate hung crookedly, untouched since her last visit. Clara stepped inside cautiously, shining her flashlight over the dusty interior. Her gaze fell immediately on the small stone marker near the back wall, the one inscribed with Liam's name. Kneeling beside the grave, Clara placed a single white rose on top of the marker. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "for reminding me how much I still have to give." As she sat there in silence, memories flooded back to her, not just of Liam, but of Daniel too. For so long she had carried her husband's loss like a heavy chain around her neck, letting it define her existence. But meeting Liam had taught her something important. Grief didn't have to be a prison. It could also be a bridge, a way to connect with others, living or otherwise, who needed support. In helping Liam, she had rediscovered her own strength. She had learned that love, whether given or received, transcended boundaries most people couldn't even imagine. Clara stayed in the mausoleum for a while longer, lost in thought. When she finally stood up to leave, she noticed something unusual etched into the wall opposite Liam's grave. At first glance, it looked like random scratches, but upon closer inspection, she realized they formed words. "Be brave." Her breath caught in her throat. The message was faint, almost imperceptible, as though it had been carved hastily with trembling hands. Had Liam left this behind? Or was it meant for someone else entirely? Clara traced the letters with her fingertips, feeling a surge of determination wash over her. Whoever had written these words, they resonated deeply with her. They were a reminder that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the willingness to face it head on. Over the next few weeks, Clara threw herself into new routines. She started volunteering at a local community center, helping organize programs for children whose families were struggling financially. Some days, she visited hospitals, spending time with patients who rarely received visitors. Other times, she simply sat by Daniel's grave, talking to him not about her pain, but about the joy she had found in helping others. Each act of kindness felt like a tribute to Liam, to the boy who had unknowingly reignited her passion for life. Still, there were moments when doubt crept in. Late at night, lying awake in bed, Clara would wonder if she had imagined the entire experience. Was it possible that grief had driven her to create Liam in her mind, conjuring him out of desperation for companionship? She wrestled with these thoughts often, questioning her sanity. But deep down, she knew the truth. Whether Liam had been a ghost, a figment of her imagination, or something else entirely, the impact he'd had on her life was undeniable. He had changed her, for the better, and that was enough. One chilly November morning, as Clara prepared to head out for her daily errands, she received an unexpected phone call. It was Sarah Harper, Liam's mother. Clara hadn't heard from her since their emotional meeting weeks earlier, and the sound of Sarah's voice brought tears to her eyes instantly. "I hope you don't mind me calling," Sarah said softly, her tone tinged with nervousness. I wanted to thank you again. For everything. Clara smiled through her tears, clutching the phone tightly. Of course. How are you holding up? There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a shaky sigh. It's hard, Sarah admitted, but knowing that Liam is at peace, it helps. More than I can put into words. They talked for nearly an hour, sharing stories about Liam and reflecting on the ways his memory continued to shape their lives. By the end of the conversation, both women felt lighter, as if a burden they had carried for years had finally been shared and understood. Before hanging up, Sarah said something that lingered in Clara's mind long after the call ended. You know, she mused, I think Liam chose you for a reason. You're special, Clara. Don't ever forget that. The months rolled by, bringing winter snows and spring blossoms. Clara kept visiting the cemetery regularly, tending to Daniel's grave and occasionally stopping by Liam's marker to leave flowers. Each trip felt less like a pilgrimage and more like a reunion with old friends. She even began keeping a journal, jotting down thoughts and reflections inspired by her experiences. Writing became a form of therapy, allowing her to process everything she had been through and make sense of the lessons she had learned. By summer, Clara had become a fixture in her community, known for her kindness and generosity. People sought her out for advice, comfort, or simply companionship. She never spoke publicly about Liam or the supernatural events that had unfolded, but she carried the story in her heart, letting it guide her actions silently. And then, one sunny afternoon while tending to Daniel's grave, Clara heard laughter echoing through the trees. It was faint, almost ethereal, but unmistakable. Smiling to herself, she glanced toward the old mausoleum, half expecting to see a small figure darting between the tombstones. But no one was there. Instead, she felt a gentle breeze brush against her cheek, carrying with it a sense of warmth and reassurance. Closing her eyes, Clara whispered, "Goodbye, Liam." Though she knew she would never see him again, she also knew he would always be with her, in the memories they shared, in the lives she touched because of him, and in the quiet moments when she felt guided by forces she couldn't explain. Life, she realized, was full of mysteries, and sometimes the greatest gift we could receive was the chance to embrace them. The laughter Clara heard that sunny afternoon stayed with her long after she left the cemetery. It wasn't just any sound, it was carefree, innocent, and full of life, like the giggles of a child playing tag on a warm summer day. Though she couldn't see anyone, the laughter felt familiar, as if it belonged to someone she had known for years, someone who had once needed her help and now seemed free. As weeks turned into months, Clara began to notice other subtle signs, too. Sometimes when she visited Daniel's grave, the flowers she brought would change positions overnight, moved slightly closer to his headstone or rearranged in a way that made them look more vibrant. Other times she'd find small objects near the mausoleum, a shiny pebble here, a feather there. These weren't random coincidences. They felt deliberate, almost like messages from someone watching over her. At first, these occurrences startled her. But as time passed, Clara came to view them not as eerie reminders of the supernatural, but as comforting gestures from those who cared about her, even if they existed beyond the veil of this world. She started leaving notes herself, tucking them under rocks or tying them to branches near the cemetery entrance. "Thank you," she would write, or simply, "I miss you both." It became a ritual, a way to stay connected to Daniel and Liam, even though they were no longer physically present. One crisp autumn evening, Clara attended a community event at the local library. The town had organized a storytelling night, inviting residents to share personal anecdotes, legends, or tales that held special meaning to them. Clara hadn't planned to participate. She rarely spoke about her experiences, but something about the cozy atmosphere drew her in. As people took turns sharing their stories, she found herself reflecting on her own journey, how meeting Liam had transformed her perspective on loss, connection, and purpose. By the end of the evening, the host announced an open mic session for Anyone brave enough to step forward. Clara hesitated, her heart pounding as she debated whether to speak up. Finally, taking a deep breath, she raised her hand and walked to the front of the room. Standing beneath the soft glow of the overhead lights, Clara looked out at the audience, a mix of neighbors, friends, and strangers, and began to speak. Her voice trembled at first, but as she recounted her encounters with Liam, it grew steadier. She didn't reveal every detail, the mysterious markings on the wall, the haunting noises in her home, but she shared enough to convey the essence of what had happened, how a lost boy had shown her the power of compassion, how helping him had helped her heal. When she finished speaking, the room fell silent save for the crackling of the fireplace in the corner. For a moment, Clara feared she might have said too much, that her story would seem unbelievable or out of place. Then, slowly, applause broke out, growing louder until it filled the entire space. People approached her afterward, thanking her for sharing such a heartfelt tale. Some confessed they had experienced similar losses and found solace in her words. Others simply hugged her, offering quiet support without needing to say anything. That night marked a turning point for Clara. She realized she wasn't alone in her struggles, or in her belief that connections could transcend death. There were others who understood even if they couldn't explain it logically, and perhaps that was the beauty of it all. Some mysteries didn't need answers. They just needed to be felt. Winter arrived, bringing snowflakes that dusted the cemetery grounds like glittering jewels. Clara continued her visits, bundling up in scarves and gloves as she trudged through the icy paths. On one particularly cold morning, she stopped by Liam's marker and noticed something unusual: fresh footprints leading away from the mausoleum. They were small, barely visible against the blanket of white, but unmistakably shaped like those of a child. Clara followed the tracks instinctively, her breath fogging the air as she moved deeper into the cemetery. The footprints led her to a tree she had never paid much attention to before, a towering oak whose branches stretched toward the sky like outstretched arms. Beneath it lay a patch of untouched snow, glistening in the sunlight. In the center of the clearing stood a wooden birdhouse, painted bright blue and decorated with tiny handprints around its edges. Clara knelt beside it, running her fingers over the smooth surface. Inside, she found a folded piece of paper tucked carefully inside. Unfolding it, she saw 3 simple words written in uneven, childlike handwriting. "We are okay." Tears welled up in her eyes as she clutched the note to her chest. Whether it was Liam reaching out one last time or a symbolic gesture from the universe itself, Clara didn't care. What mattered was the message it carried: peace. Peace for Liam, for Daniel, and for herself. Spring returned, melting the snow and painting the world in shades of green and gold. Clara celebrated the season by planting flowers in her garden, a tribute to the lives that had touched hers. She chose daisies, Daniel's favorite, and marigolds, which reminded her of Liam's golden curls. As she worked, she thought about how far she had come since that fateful Sunday morning, when she first heard a child crying in the cemetery. Grief still lingered, of course. It always would. But it no longer consumed her. Instead, it coexisted with gratitude, joy, and hope. Clara had learned to carry her losses not as weights but as anchors, grounding her in the lessons they had taught her. She had discovered strength she didn't know she possessed and forged connections that transcended the boundaries of life and death. On a bright April morning, Clara decided to visit the cemetery one last time before embarking on a new chapter of her life. She packed a picnic basket filled with sandwiches, fruit, and lemonade, determined to spend the day surrounded by memories. When she arrived, she spread a blanket beneath Daniel's favorite oak tree and sat down, savoring the warmth of the sun on her face. As she ate, she glanced around the cemetery, taking in the sights and sounds that had become so familiar. Birds chirped cheerfully in the distance, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves above her. For the first time in years, Clara felt truly at peace. She wasn't alone. Not really. Daniel and Liam were with her, always, in ways she couldn't fully understand but didn't need to question. Before leaving, she placed 2 bouquets of flowers, one on Daniel's grave and another on Liam's marker. "Take care of each other," she whispered, smiling softly. Then gathering her things, she walked back to her car, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. Life went on, as it always does. Clara continued volunteering, writing, and finding joy in the little moments that made existence worthwhile. She never forgot Liam or the role he had played in her healing journey. In fact, she often wondered what kind of person he might have grown up to be if fate had allowed it. Would he have been kind, adventurous, creative? The possibilities were endless, and imagining them brought her comfort. Years later, when Clara finally retired, she wrote a book inspired by her experiences. It wasn't a ghost story per se, but rather a reflection on love, loss, and the unbreakable bonds between people. She titled it Echoes of Kindness and dedicated it to Daniel and Liam, thanking them for showing her the light during her darkest days. The book resonated with readers worldwide, reminding countless individuals that even in sorrow, there is beauty, and even in mystery there is meaning. For Clara, it was proof that her encounter with Liam hadn't just changed her life. It had rippled outward, touching hearts she would never meet. And so, as she sat on her porch one evening watching the sunset paint the horizon in hues of pink and orange, Clara smiled. She didn't need answers anymore. She had something better: closure, purpose, and the knowledge that love endures. All kinds of love across all kinds of boundaries.